Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to you all here in Pakhuis de Zwijger on this Tuesday evening. And it's wonderful to see so many people present. I'm looking forward to an inspiring event. My name is Wendy van Wilgenburg. I'm the founder and director of the Ambacht in Beeld Festival, or for the not Dutch people, the Craft in Focus Festival, which is an annual event focusing on master craftsmanship with workshops and masterclasses for the general audience of all ages. The 7th edition in Amsterdam is the weekend after next, so September 28 and 29 in the Hallen in Amsterdam. So please help spread the word, take a poster and postcards with you on your way out, and make sure to visit the festival. Besides this, we also organize a separate film festival in March in Lab 111 in Amsterdam. We have an educational program for children, a satellite event in New York City, and every year we have a symposium to tackle specific subjects related to master craftsmanship. The theme of this symposium is craftsmanship, innovation, and sustainability. The main question is, how can we learn from and collaborate with master craftsmen and women in this time where we need to change the way we produce and consume? I decided on this subject after watching the beautiful short film The Future is Handmade by archaeologist Maikel Kuijpers, who is the first speaker of this evening, and he will talk about his film and research shortly. So I will leave it up to you, Maikel, to dive deeper into the subject. Maikel and I have organized this evening together, and I want to thank you for our collaboration. And I'm grateful that we have such a lovely lineup of speakers with Trevor Marchand, Mignosa, Maaike Roozenburg, Godelieve, Annemieke, Koster, and Hemeltjen. A warm welcome to you, our speakers. Besides stressing the importance of the knowledge of master craftsmen, our aim this evening is to discuss policy to foster collaboration and to inspire you, the audience, all with practical solutions on today's sustainability challenges. To give an example of such a practical solution, I invited Marieke de Hoop, who is a paper maker in Rotterdam. She unfortunately cannot be here because she's in Uzbekistan for a handicraft event. But she has developed ways to make paper from waste. For example, from old jeans or from asparagus peel. And I think that's truly fascinating. And one of her challenges, however, is upscaling. So how can you scale it up to come to a number of paper that is usable for mass production, for mass consumption. So it's interesting to discuss challenges as well. Marieke will teach a masterclass at our festival, so if you want to know all about making your own pulp and making paper from asparagus peel, you're welcome to join our masterclass at the festival. So why is this subject important? I find that the knowledge of master craftsmen is of great value to our society, especially in a time when so many things are fleeting, where children have lost the ability to make something. And I always give the example of my own 2 boys who are now 11 and 13, and all they can do is swipe and play, and they play Minecraft. But really making something with their own hands is not taught in schools, it's not something that comes natural for these children. So I think it's important that children are engaged in making things. And it's a time where we're all disconnected from materials, from tools, and from working with our bodies. And I'm sure that Trevor will address this further. The beauty of handmade quality products, which have a unique story, is worth making an effort for. The embodied knowledge of craftsmen, learned through many years of practice and perfectioning, is something that's under threat due to capitalism, focus on efficiency, and quantity instead of quality. With our festival and everything that I undertake, I aim to engage a large audience so that they can experience making something themselves. Through this, they enjoy the actual making, getting their hands dirty, and this makes them hopefully value master craftsmanship. Because looking at a craftsman is satisfying, and when you look at a person making something who is a master, it looks easy. But when you try it yourself in one of the workshops or masterclasses, you say, okay, it's not that easy. And when you try pottery, you have to take the clay out of your ears. So that's why it's a hands-on event, and that's why I think that's important. And you enjoy the beauty and the fun of making. And then I hope through that people will appreciate the years of dedication it takes to become a master, to master a craft, and hence the different price value and story of the product. Plus, I want to give craftsmen a proper stage where they can meet potential new customers, perhaps successors, people who want to do follow-up workshops, because again, it is not an easy time to be a craftsperson. Even when the Dutch government now, through a public awareness sieren campaign, says that you should repair instead of throw away, which is awesome, but craftsmen are still less and less visible. The rent for the workshops is getting too expensive in the cities. They have a hard time finding successors, and customers need to really see the value to be willing to pay for handmade quality products. So we aim to contribute toward this through organized public events and this symposium also this evening. So I want to start real quickly with the event, but first a few thank yous. Olivier Rijken is present in the back, in the pink shirt. He will make an illustration of the evening, and at the end of the evening we will bring it to the front, and then you can see what he has drawn, and we will have a nice visual summary of all the speakers and everything that's said. And after that we'll have an informal drink downstairs. Everybody should have received a token for a drink, so the first drink is on us, and that will be around 10 p.m. I want to thank, of course, Pakhuis de Zwijger for their kind hospitality, NWA and WO for funding the symposium. They're there with the logos. I want to thank the Fonds voor Cultuurparticipatie, Municipality of Amsterdam, and Prins Bernhard Cultuurfonds for their support this year, and my team, Rosanna for the technical support, Janina and Willem for productional support, and Bas, photographer Bram for the pictures. And also this event is recorded live, so we're live now via the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger for everybody who cannot be present, but I'm happy that you are present, of course. And they will keep it, so everybody who wants to watch it again later, it will be online forever. So it's good that this is properly documented, which also means that you can still speak freely. I'm also a filmmaker and editor, so if you want to have anything edited out, or me, we can do that, no problem. So now I want to give the mic to Joni Zwart, who is the moderator for this evening, and she will guard the time very strictly, but friendly. And she will also invite you after the presentation to join in the discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I shall introduce the speakers to you. Wendy has already named them. Just to give you an idea, the first three speakers will more or less outline the context of this symposium. So they will address the historical context of craft and the importance of craft also for the future, for innovation. They will speak about the value of embodied knowledge and skill learning. And then there's also the economic context. What is the significance of crafts in contemporary societies across the world? What challenges do craftsmen face? Once this context is sketched, 4 other speakers will present their initiatives. They will share their learnings, their success stories, and those are all based on practical experience. After you've heard all these speakers, the words is yours. So please try to save your questions for after the talks, and hopefully there'll be enough time to let everyone share their ideas, their success stories, their learnings, their challenges. But before we do so, I'm going to introduce Maikel Kuijpers for you. Rosanne, if you want to get the talk ready. Maikel, a few words so you don't have to introduce yourself. Assistant Professor of European Prehistory at Leiden University, Maikel holds a PhD in archaeology from Cambridge University. His current research explores the relationships between materials, skills, and innovation. Craft production, Maikel argues, offers an alternative to the linear economy, this alternative being a circular economy based on sustainability, durability, and excellence. A vital part of a smooth transition to this system are attractive and inclusive stories, and those are stories craft has to offer. And, well, you've already heard about it. This is beautifully shown in the documentary The Future is Handmade. We will not show the documentary this evening, but it will be shown on the opening night of our festival on 27th of September in the Filmhalle, so you're very welcome to come see it there. When you can't make it to that opening night, the documentary is available online, and we highly recommend it to you. When asked why the future's handmade was made by an archaeologist, Maikel's answer was, because my concerns lie in the future. And this is why I like to focus on the formulation of knowledge, the effects of new materials on societies, and how innovations work. Many of these are long-term processes, so the past is an ideal place to study them. Where's yours?
Thank you very much. That was a lovely introduction, actually, of my work. It's absolutely fantastic to see such a big room completely filled. Excellent opportunity to discuss some of the ideas that we will propose tonight. So as Wendy already mentioned, this event is organized on the back of a proposal that we sent in to the Dutch Science Foundation, and with we, I mean some colleagues from Rotterdam, from Leiden, from Cambridge. Two of them are here, Wave, Jochem there, Ketelin, a sociologist and a heritage specialist. And this proposal is under review. It's not funded yet, because we're still looking for partners, so if you find it very interesting, do come and talk to us. But let's start with a small excerpt from the National Science Agenda. So this is the National Science Agenda put down by the government on the circular economy. It's quite a bit of text, and I'm curious whether anyone sort of notices anything interesting in this piece of text. If you do, you're free to comment on it. If not, I can help you a little bit. What I find interesting about this text is if there are particular themes and topics in here. It says it's about core values, about changes, it's about behavior, many different actors. It's even about changing behavior. Now that is really quite difficult, changing behavior. And then identifying factors that people find motivating. So interestingly, there's nothing technical about this actually. Even more interesting because, as many of you will know right now, there's a discussion going on why the humanities are relevant. You know, money being taken away from the humanities and put with the sciences. Well, this is why they are important. A technical university is not in the game of getting core values acknowledged. How change works is not their main concern, and they have little to say on behavior. Archaeologists, however, and that's the species that I belong to, understanding long-term societal changes and human behavior is basically our core business. So it's from this perspective that I'm speaking to you this evening. And in a nutshell, what I would like to discuss with you tonight is that the notion of craftsmanship, the culture of craftsmanship, can actually deliver what is asked here. And I want to address 3 points why it can do so. Firstly, I think craftsmanship actually entails the core values we need for a circular economy. Second, it's about a particular behavior towards materials, and that behavior we can identify as skill. The skill is a very inclusive form of knowledge. And third, it's motivating. It's something that people enjoy. I don't have to tell this to you, of course, but it's something that people enjoy, appreciate, and not just an academic elite, not just people who vote GroenLinks. You know, craftsmanship it has a very nice balance between tradition and innovation, and it's liked by a very diverse group of people. So if we go into this, the particular values that are important for the circular economy, they resonate really well with craftsmanship. And I'm thinking here about durability, about sustainability, about excellence. You know, craftsmanship is about a different mentality towards materials. And this aligns really well with what we would need for a circular economy. So basically, it's about producing fewer but better things. So it's a different attitude towards materials, where we realize that it is materials, not money, that are essential. And that we need to make good use of materials, not waste them. And this is nothing new, of course, in the world of craftsmanship. There's a certain respect towards materials, and we see a lot of recycling. And this kind of behavior also has very, very deep roots. So just one example from my research on Bronze Age metalworking, craftsmanship. This would be, let's say, Bronze Age excellence. So it's a ceremonial dirk. It's found, you can find it in a museum in Leiden, made from bronze about 1800 BCE. But in the Bronze Age, they were also doing recycling. So they were also making hundreds and hundreds of almost identical axes. That's also interesting if we think about craft as producing unique objects. I mean, don't know whether that definition stands if we look at this, but that's another discussion. What I did with, I mean, this is my academic work, but this can translate, of course, into a different kind of narrative. So I wrote a few pieces. One of them was picked up by the World Economic Forum. You get a title like this. Findings show that recycling has been with us since the Bronze Age. And that's actually really interesting what is happening here. I mean, I'm focusing on the Bronze Age, but at the same time, rooting recycling as a behavior in the past. And that's important because the past provides very powerful narratives. It anchors our behavior and legitimizes. I will come back to this. First, the second point. Skill is an inclusive form of knowledge. This is the second reason why a circular economy should be an economy of craftsmanship. And that's because it's more inclusive. Craftsmanship is embodied in skill, and skill is a far more inclusive type of knowledge. You know, it exists, or it comes to exist in the interaction with materials, and that's then where the knowledge is created. So it's open to far more people than just people who go to the university. I'm sure Trevor will tell more about this, so I'll keep it short here. My documentary stressed this point also. And here you see a newspaper article and an interview with Godelieve and me, where we tried to get this message across. For me, as an archaeologist, I take a very broad perspective on craft. So it's about skilled human-material relationships. And these are found actually in many, many places. So you have obviously the more traditional crafts, but you know, you can also be very innovative about it. So the cork shoes, but also barbers, bakeries, and the instrument makers at the Leidsche Instrumentmaker school. But I would even put in here some scientists that I've been talking to who are developing this new material, graphene. And when they tell me how they work in the lab, it's basically they're guided by the material. In the same way that craftspeople also let themselves be guided by the material. That's how knowledge comes about. So when we focus on skill, we actually can expand our definition of craftsmanship to include technical careers, MBOs, engineers. Craft work is skilled work and produces knowledge. Then on to the third point. And this is perhaps the most important one. It motivates new narratives. And these are narratives that people can identify with. And this is very much what our research will be about, how this works and how we can help this along. So an economy is basically, in a very simply said, it's a bunch of stories that we tell each other and that we believe in. And the linear economy that we have now has been created on the basis of particular assumptions about human behavior. Actually, some assumptions that we know now are incorrect. And in human history, this extremely wasteful linear economy that we have now, this is actually the anomaly. This is strange, what we are doing. So when we want to change then to a circular economy, you need different stories. You need stories like what these guys are doing here from Food Leather in Rotterdam. They're creating, they don't believe in waste, so they are creating leather from fruit waste. And they're doing more than innovating. They're doing more than creating a bag. They're actually creating a new mentality. They're creating new narratives that fit a new economy. So, and this is important because if you want to change behavior, you need good stories to act upon. You know, stories on which people can act. And these need not only be intellectual, but emotional, because research has shown us that we are emotional and irrational beings. And again, I would say craftsmanship is very powerful here. And that has to do with the fact that craftsmanship has such deep roots in the past. Craftsmanship triggers nostalgia, for instance. Now, nostalgia is very often frowned upon by people who want innovation. But what these people fail to realize is that nostalgia is an extremely powerful political emotion. And that can also drive change, actually, not just hold things back. So I already gave the example of how you can use the past to anchor an innovation and legitimize particular behavior. And this is what craftsmanship could do really well. And there's the potential of a powerful, very productive balance between tradition and innovation. So to end, I want to show you a few examples. I don't know, how much time do I have left? A little bit, so then not 3 examples, but maybe 2. And first this one. Are there any carpenters in the room? The mortise and tenon joint, I'm sure that's extremely familiar with you. This is an extremely old technique. The first example that we have of this is in the Neolithic. So we're talking about 7,000 years ago. You had carpenters making that joint. And you see exactly the same joint nowadays. And actually, architects are returning to this because wood is becoming more popular again, and this joint is a strong and sustainable method. So this deep history can be really powerful for craftsmanship. A second example, which I think is even more stunning. This piece of bone was found by a colleague of mine in France, and research has shown that it's used for leatherworking. Now this is a Neanderthal tool, so it's not even Homo sapiens sapiens like us, modern humans. Talking 50,000 years ago. If you go on the internet, you can find exactly the same tool. Exactly the same tool. This is made from a cow's rib. This a cow-like being, a bovine. I mean, you didn't have obviously modern cows then. And this tool is used by craftspeople who work in Paris at the Hermès factory who make leather bags. And they swear that this is the kind of tool that they need to use. It needs to be made from a rib. Now, that's quite amazing. And that in a way shows that these techniques, I would actually argue that these techniques are the heritage of materials. And it's even more amazing if you think of it in this way. If we would be able to put these two people together, a Neanderthal and the lady at the Hermès factory making these leather bags, obviously they would not speak each other's language. But I would argue that they would actually be able to communicate. They would actually understand each other in terms of what they are doing. And the communication would go via the material. Now, this creates obviously an emotional bond that intellectual narratives cannot. And this is important as identities are felt. They are not calculated, they're not intellectually argued for. So the promise I think that craftsmanship holds is to become an identifying marker for a circular economy. This is the example I will skip, which maybe I'll come back to in the questions. Now, our idea is that this culture of craftsmanship can actually produce very strong narratives that challenge the old economy, that actually find the right balance between tradition and innovation, and that have enough emotional force to be heard and followed. And what you would want to end up with, in a way, is that a sign like Made in Europe for people would instantly they would recognize it as, oh, that's craftsmanship, that's sustainable, that's durable. The question our project, in a way, asks is, how do you make this happen? That's the presentation. Thank you.
keep that question in mind for later. You can ask it. Yeah. How do we make this happen? We'll remember it. Our next speaker is Mr. Trevor Marchand, Emeritus Professor of Social Anthropology at SOAS, University of London. For more than 25 years, he has worked alongside craftspeople in the traditional building trades in northern Nigeria, Yemen, Mali, and East London, and also worked together with a prolific Ugandan British craftsman and artists. Marchand's research focuses on apprenticeship and skill learning and on embodied forms of cognition and communication. He also features in Maikel's documentary and speaks about these embodied forms of cognition, embodied knowledge. To achieve real mastery, artisans must use the mind and the body with their full sensory apparatus. Work of this kind intertwines an artisan's physical knowledge and intellectual knowledge. We are honored that Trevor Marchand is with us tonight. His talk, Smart Bodies, you see it on the screen already, will explore the pivotal role played by the body in solving problems and mathematizing on-site at the workbench and in the studio. Are you ready for the talk? Yeah? Then I would like to invite you to come in here. Give him a warm applause.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy and Maikel, for inviting me here. I'm really pleased to be here. So, since the Italian Renaissance, craft in Western Europe was separated from art and defined in contrasting and lowly relation to it. The deeper roots of this legacy are in ancient Greek partitions between intellectual and manual labor. For the Greeks, intellectual work was associated with the esteemed disciplines of mathematics, geometry, and logic. Techne, on the other hand, referred to art, craft, and craftsmanship, all of which were consigned to the province of manual labor. The mathematical formulation of perspective drawing and painting during the 15th century, however, licensed elite Renaissance artists to leverage the ancient Greek distinction in order to distinguish themselves as authors of visual representations and symbolic statements from the makers of merely functional things. The meaning of craft and its status fluctuated over the following centuries in relation to the fine arts and in relation to changing political and economic situations, and during the 19th century in relation to industrialization and new policies on education and vocational training. The polymath, William Morris, who I expect many of you will know here, inspired by Marx and by passages from John Ruskin's The Nature of Gothic, attempted to liberate craftwork from its restrictive Victorian associations with the working classes and to make craft and craftwork fashionable and notably a vehicle for utopian social change. In large measure, craft today continues to be conceived at a popular level as a workmanship of physical labor in concert with earthy materials, producing primarily decorative and functional wares for middle-class homes. It is therefore made to stand in opposition to the intellectual endeavor of the artist who strives to overcome the material's resistance in order to transform it into a transcendental sign. Such crude conceptions about the limits, purpose, and the nature of craft have also been strategically construed by makers themselves to make craftwork and handwork more generally the engine of grassroots countercultural movements. Contemporary craft remains a social movement of resistance and opposition to mainstream culture. It stands against the anonymity of mass production, against ugliness, against big money capitalism, against corporate labor, and against disembodiment in all its forms. Nevertheless, in societies around the world, handwork has increasingly come to be viewed as something that children and young adults are steered into when they are judged to have little or no academic ability. Sadly, working with the hands is perceived as a fallback position or a second choice. By contrast, my anthropological research challenges the mind-body dichotomy that underpins this prejudice and reveals the complexity of learning and the various kinds of knowledge that skilled craft work entails. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I came to anthropology as a trained architect with design and construction experience. During the past 25 years, I've carried out a number of long fieldwork studies that involved training and working alongside craftspeople, mostly in the building trades, in order to better understand local apprenticeship regimes, social politics, and embodied ways of learning and knowing. I labored for a year with traditional minaret builders in Sana'a, Yemen, and for 2 building seasons, I worked with mud brick masons in Jenne, Mali. And I later enrolled for 2 years as a full-time trainee in fine woodworking and furniture making at the historic Building Crafts College in East London. More recently, I carried out a one-to-one study with Andrew Almeding, a London-based Ugandan British artisan, in order to better understand the problem-solving tactics he employs in the flow of hands-on work and his embodied ways of mathematizing dimensions, volumes, geometries, patterns, and proportions in the things that he makes. My fieldwork projects demonstrate that an apprentice-style research method is well suited to studying enskillment and ways of knowing in contexts that are defined mainly by physical activity. By engaging in the work, I acquired first-hand experience in the craft practice that I theorize and write about. In sharing the daily toil and celebrating the accomplishments that we achieved as a building team or a craft community, my life became entangled with those of my fellow practitioners. We grew together not only in craft skills, but also in shared worldviews and in our aspirations for better ways of working and living. The range of contexts in which I've worked and trained has allowed me to consider similarities and differences in skill learning, and more particularly, to contemplate the nature of embodied communication and embodied knowledge. Learning a craft, like learning to play a sport or to dance, is achieved in large measure through observation, touch, and movement. The processes of interpreting, simulating, and imitating a grasp, a gesture, or a movement are seated directly in the motor domains of our cognition. Achieving proficiency or mastery, of course, entails repeated physical practice, as well as simulated rehearsal of that practice at a motor level. I'm not denying spoken language has a role in the realm of craft practice and learning. Indeed, words are regularly used to direct focus, coordinate activities, and communicate conceptual ideas or values related to the enterprise. But speech is an instrument for talking about production, for reflecting on the doing of craft work, but it is not an instrument of the doing itself. The masons I worked with in Yemen and Mali were simultaneously involved in both the design and construction of form and space through their direct physical engagement in making. In effect, their ideas took shape in the coordinated activities of eyes, hands, and tools. And I'm going to talk about those things in turn. So allow me to begin with eyes. In the context of craft work, having a critical eye, as we say in English, is not, as the idiom seemingly implies, restricted to acute visual judgment. It includes more generally all of the perceptual senses used for assessing the quality of both one's own workmanship and one's practice, and very importantly, for spotting the deficiencies, the mistakes, the problems. A refined olfactory sense is crucial, for example, for the perfumer, the brewer and distiller, or the tanner. Discriminating acoustic judgment is indispensable for the instrument maker, bell founder, or maker of fine crystal stemware. And a discerning sense of touch is essential for the carpenter, the carver, the potter, and numerous other craftspeople whose outputs are valued for their surfaces, textures, thicknesses, or weights. Emphases on developing particular senses vary depending on the craft or in relation to the task. But in every case, developing a critical eye means gradually elevating perceptual awareness through practice and learning to direct sustained attention to the kinds of information that need to be registered, attended to, and processed in order to do something well. Also to consider is the mind's eye. A craftsperson's regular handling, physical manipulation, and rotation of the materials they use and the objects they make cultivates a cognitive ability to mentally rotate, assemble, and disassemble three-dimensional objects in the mind's eye. This is an essential skill for imagining, creating, and making artifacts, whether it's a woven textile, a clay vessel, blown glass, a piece of jewelry, a stone carving, or a carpentry project. It is also vital for problem solving when it's discovered that something somewhere in the item being made has gone wrong. Making architectural joinery or furniture, for example, typically involves the assembly of two or many components, each with their own dimensions, shapes, profiles, and functions in the final assembly. A carpenter needs to be able to visualize not only each individual component, but also how they fit together to make the whole and make the whole hold together. The challenge of picturing and rotating joints in the mind's eye can be especially acute because joints are often concealed from view, and depending on the kind of joint, the angles and configurations of the interlocking parts may be geometrically highly complex. It is, however, the skilled hand wielding specialized tools that is most fetishized in craftwork. Anatomists and neurologists converge on the same finding, namely the existence of a special and intricate connection between brain and hand. Brain and hand resist differentiation into neatly bounded categories and are instead intimately joined by the nervous system, each stimulating activity and development in the other. The nervous system connects brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerve, neuromuscular junction, and onward down to the quarks of our fingertips, and back again. As American neurologist Frank Wilson astutely noted, brain is hand and hand is brain, and for a great number of people, the hand becomes the critical instrument of thought, feeling, and intention for a lifetime of professional work. The ability to engage in skilled handiwork lends practitioners a vital sense of agency to make, undo, repair, and transform their world and the worlds of others in an immediate, practical, hands-on way. Tools and materials are, like the hand, fundamental to the formation of a craftsperson's knowledge. In use, hand tools become an extension of the limbs, hands, and fingers, and regular practice results in a coordinated integration of mind, body, and tool. This has been subject to intense study in psychology and the neurosciences. The state of unified focus between brain and hand and tool generates direct dynamic relations between one's subjectivity and the things that one makes. Notably, hand skills with tools are more complex than simply training the hand to perform a series of correct actions. Tool-wielding skills entail balanced posture and complementary movement of other parts of the body in synchrony and rhythm with the dominant hand. They rely on sophisticated coordination between sensory knowledge and motor activity, and on an ability to flexibly adjust and respond to the material being worked. Whether a craftsperson is working with clay, stone, glass, yarn, or any other medium, the materials speak back to the actions made upon and with them. In the case of carpentry, for example, every plank of timber is uniquely figured and textured, with great variation in hardness and density. And so each responds differently to the blade of the tools, requiring the carpenter to continually modify their actions and their tactics in working with it. During moments of operating in oneness with tools and materials, numerous craftspeople I've interviewed describe the experience as being in the zone. But such fluid rhythmic efficiency is only part of the story behind skilled handwork. Learning and practicing a craft inevitably involves ruptures to the flow and making mistakes. I expect that many of you here this evening would agree with David Pye's observation that a degree of risk is inherent to handwork. Even the most seasoned expert is susceptible to making errors when experimenting with new tools, craft methods, or materials, or simply when having an off day in the studio or on the work site. Learning in craft work does not typically arise while actually making the mistakes, but rather the making of mistakes offers critical starting points for learning and improving. Learning arises in spotting that a mistake has been made, in identifying and understanding it as a problem for which a strategy can be devised or a tactic executed to remove, resolve, or work around it. And hopefully to move on with the knowledge that the experience has afforded. Notably, an individual's knowledge gained during problem solving includes new understanding as well as newly configured activity. In other words, learning happens not only at the conceptual level, but our perceptual systems too learn to attune differently to the environment, and our nervous system and the muscles that it coordinates learn to carry out procedures in novel ways. Thus, situated problem solving encompasses the full learning potential of a perceiving, discerning, and engaged individual. Problem solving and activities are involved at every stage of production. In the practical work of design and making, problem solving takes place when calculating quantities, weights and dimensions, engineering structures, configuring geometries, proportion and scale, choosing or producing colors, selecting and evaluating materials, choosing, setting up, and possibly modifying your tools for the task, and making jigs. Indeed, creative problem solving in design and making demands a scientific attitude, and equally, problem solving in the sciences demands creativity. Chair makers, for example, must consider the tension, compression, torque, torsion, and shear that loads will exert on the legs, seat, arms, and back of the chairs that they manufacture. Potters experiment with the chemistry of glazes to establish correlations between kiln temperatures, timing, and resulting colors, effects, and the resilience of surfaces. Glass blowers experiment with heat, materials, and methods to produce new vessels with novel affordances. Watchmakers and mechanics must comprehend the physics of movement and the performance and durability of materials from which components are manufactured. Smiths need to understand the properties of metals. Specialist animal breeders and trainers test the psychology, traits, potentials, and limitations of their animals and of themselves. And the work of weavers embodies mathematical, geometrical, and proportional understanding and experimentation. These are only a few examples of the way that craftspeople engage scientifically in their everyday work and problem solving. Growth and innovation in any of these creative fields begins with a grasp of the circumstances and the formulation of corresponding problems that will drive the search for new results. Results that not only satisfy basic criteria, but also improve quality and push boundaries. So just to conclude with a few remarks. I think all of us here would agree that the knowing body has for too long been underestimated, undervalued, and misunderstood, in part because of the limits of spoken language for describing and objectifying what it is we know how to do. I hope that I've made clear with my examples that skill acquisition is not unthinking imitation. Embodied learning involves multiple and highly complex kinds of knowledge, and skilled practice is a hard-earned cognitive achievement. And when I say cognitive, it goes beyond conceptual cognition. I mean cognition that's related to our motor movements, our perception, the whole works. It is with bodies and not merely words that people learn, interpret, improvise, express, negotiate. In a word, craft their ways of knowing in the world. Practical know-how, therefore, needs to be accorded the value and status it deserves, not just in terms of productivity and providing essential skills for the regional and national economies, but more importantly, as a vehicle for satisfying work and life. Artisanal craft and skilled labor must be revived as viable and desirable career paths for youth and regarded with the same level of esteem accorded to other forms of higher education. Immersion in challenging and creative work-based education, whether in an apprenticeship or at a vocational institution, brings about unity between muscles, mind, and spirit, and it establishes a pride and a responsibility for the things that we make. These are surely the foundations for a sense of meaningful purpose, communal belonging, and enduring social citizenship. I will end there.
Thank you very much, Trevor. The next speaker about to call on stage is Mignosa, researcher at the University of Catania in Italy and a lecturer at cultural economics at the Erasmus University here in the Netherlands in Rotterdam. She has published several books and scientific articles, holds a PhD from Erasmus University in Rotterdam, and a recent publication is called A Cultural Economics Analysis of Craft, which is also what the talk, I'm told, is going to be based on. And one of the key questions in this book is, are we aware of the value of craft, the values of craft? Well, I think everyone here present certainly is, not least thanks to the two previous speakers. Mignosa and her co-editor bring together several contributors, cultural economists, researchers, and professionals. The book, which if you are interested, can be found on the website of the publisher, Palgrave Macmillan. Just by typing in A Cultural Economic Analysis of Craft, you can see the title on our Ambacht in Beeld website as well. It is essential reading for anyone interested in the economic features of craft and craftsmanship around the world, as well as for those interested in the importance of policy, a topic not yet mentioned before this evening, the importance of policy in bringing about effective, sustainable development. Anna, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Because I'm Italian and I talk too much. So I'll try to keep track of my time. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Wendy for inviting me and Maikel, because I know it was through you, because I'm really interested in craft, though I'm an economist, so I hope the presentation of Maikel is not worrisome for you. I won't talk about a linear economy, I must say. But indeed, the research we've been doing is based on the fact that we believe that craft has several values, but it's still sort of difficult to see these actually widely acknowledged in society. We are a group of interested people, but the reality is maybe a bit different. And we are trying to get a fuller perspective, also extending the research with the Dutch Craft Council at the moment, but hopefully internationally, to try to understand a bit better what is craft. I'm not a craftsman, unfortunately. I like Nutselen, but I'm not a craft person like Trevor. So it's really based on passion, but also the fascination with the sector. And the fascination with the sector made us notice that there's been an increased attention towards craft. I mean, there was an exhibition in 2011 at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where it's dealing with craft, the museum, but it's interesting that they want to look at the role of making in our lives. So it's not craft as objects, but the role, again, of craft. And then later in Boymans, there was also an exhibition, handmade. And again, the emphasis is not on the object, but on the role that craft can have for society. This increased attention has been really spreading. This is actually my office at Erasmus, and this is Mariangela, who is my colleague, and my collection of articles, piece of papers, conferences dealing with craft. And it's increasing. I mean, last year it wasn't so full. So there's really an increased attention towards craft, and it's not just craft, but craft is used to can I use craftized objects which are not craft or normally not considered as craft objects? Now they get this sort of craft idea with it. Or also there's an emphasis on the role of communities. That paper down there, it's about the role of craft for Syrian refugees. So how can we try through craft to empower people, capacitate people who are not in an ideal or, of course, the impact on the economy. And here we go. What is the economic analysis so far? There are a lot of international organizations. We refer a lot to the UNCTAD report that from 2008 to 2018, it's the last one, have been looking at the creative economy. And craft is considered to be part of this creative economy. UNCTAD, however, recognized the role of craft for job creation, which is something very important for us, or in general in the rhetoric, but also the role that it can have craft can have for from the point of view culture, social and historical value. So the values that you were mentioning before are also acknowledged by UNCTAD. However, if we look at the report, what we find are numbers. So we start with the countries comparison about creative goods, who are the top exporters, who are the top exporters. But what is interesting for us is to look where crafts stand. And if you look, craft is really like a tiny, tiny proportion. If we look at the importers, it's just the same. It was 9% in 2002. It went down to 6% in 2015. If we focus now on craft, really, again, we see which are the countries that export more. First of all, there's China, but then you have Turkey, Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. And you can see the difference between developing and developed countries. It's quite interesting to see, for example, how strong is Netherlands, despite, you know, the introduction was like, oh, there's not much attention. But as an Italian, I can tell you that there's much more attention on craft in the Netherlands than there is in Italy, which is supposed to be very careful about craft. There's a strong and long tradition. But if I see the attention from the policy point of view, from the academic point of view, there's no comparison there. However, despite all this data, what is interesting is a small note that you read in this report that says, okay, we consider craft as important for economic reason, but there are not so many studies which look down at the sector. And moreover, this sort of market approach, import-export, these are numbers, totally leave out what are the values of craft, leave out the cultural aspect of craft, which are so important, so embodied in craft, as we have just heard from my predecessors here on the stand. For this reason, I must say that my question would be, okay, how can then cultural economics step in? I'm a cultural economist, supposed to be a cultural economist, not an economist, please. I like to emphasize the difference, and I believe that the cultural economic approach can provide a sort of a different view, which goes along the line that Maikel was mentioning, not anymore this linear, but more towards this circular approach to craft. And in fact, we've been the thing is that we noticed that there's not too much attention among my colleagues. Two colleagues talked about craft, Francesca Cominelli and François Greff, about Xavier Greff, with reference to the intangible heritage. Kazuko Goto, a Japanese colleague, connected craft to culture and creative industries. Then with my colleagues, Arjo Klamer, Prijatic, Kotipalli, Lily Young, Tora Feldstedt, Kazuko Goto again, we did an international research looking at craft, both creative craft or artistic craft, and in order to see, looking at the difference between 7 countries, in order to understand what we can learn from these differences. And finally, the book that was nicely introduced before, we tried to somehow pin down the main findings, but also reflect a bit more, involving not only culture economists, but we have a chapter from Maikel, we have a chapter from a designer, from people working in the craft sector. We wanted really to try to bring the conversation a bit further in order to try really to include all the values in the conversation, and not just these numbers, which actually, after all, don't tell us too much. But so, if we try to do a cultural economic approach, what are the issues there? And I must tell you, I can tell you in advance that we go a lot towards policy, because actually when we look at the the craft sector, the first thing that we do as culture economists is to compare it with other culture sector and see if we can apply some of the theories that has been developed so far to this sector. And there's a lot in common. For instance, the fact that sometimes the market doesn't work, and this is one of the elements that came up, the difficulties of the sector. But also, is craft related to intangible heritage, or is it related to the culture and creative industries? This, which might seem a bit of a sort of abstract definition, is fundamental when we look at policies, and we will see that in a moment, for instance. Moreover, is it something, what is the role of institutions? Is our government intervening? Is it a matter of bottom-up processes? How can we do something for craft? Which are the institutions that should take some sort of initiative? What we notice, there are often cultural clusters. So can we make sense of these? How can we make sense of these? And still, what is the state of the sector? We're not satisfied with having data on import and export. We want to know more. And for this reason, the idea is to talk about a craft culture, which is something that would really try to bring together all these different values. So let's try to see what all these issues mean if I talk about policies. The first thing would be definition of craft, utilitarian, artistic. I don't go into this, that's not my specialty, I don't dare to do something like that. But as I mentioned before, it is important to understand what we define as culture in order to understand which kind of policies do we want to use. Are we gonna go for subsidies, or do we want tax incentives? Do we want to facilitate young craftsmen reducing the amount of taxes that they should pay? I can tell you that there's a huge difference if you're a craft person in the Netherlands or in Italy, for instance, just from a tax point of view. Or do you want to do activities that capacitate people working in the sector, training to give some more managerial skill, or to help knowing what should be done from the point of view, for example, of property right, support to education. Before, Trevor and Maikel were mentioning also the problem in the transmission of skills. Or should we just consider the support to export? You know, this what we saw before with the data from UNCTAD. Let's have a look at the possible policies, very briefly. If we talk about intangible heritage, there's already a lot going on. In some countries, you have the living heritage or the living treasure. Otherwise, what you can have is the community holder, which are a knowledge of the people who bear some traditional craft skills and are supposed to transmit them. Or shall we do a list? Shall we just make a list of craft as the UNESCO list, if you want? Include some craft, not only craft. I'm talking of intangible heritage, and craft is supposed to be part of it. But we have also lists at the national level. Well, what happens there is that sometimes community don't like it, because they say, okay, if you put this in a list, it will become crystallized. I cannot do anything anymore. You were saying before, we learn by the error and we try to improve. But if you block it in a list, you cannot move anymore, because that's not anymore corresponding to what is in that list. Then, if we look at the culture and creative industries, are we going to support export, or do we want to support innovation? This is something that, for instance, in Holland is the first slide from Maikel was showing that it's quite on the agenda. But what do we mean by innovation? There's often this connection with design and architecture. But there again, is it always like a happy marriage? Or sometimes what we heard at the previous symposium we were together is that craftsmen get worried that they become like a means of production which is just exploited by designer or by artist or by architect. Where is the measure there? What is the right policies? I mentioned before that we noticed there's a sort of regional clustering of craft. Well, from the point of view of regional economic, this is super interesting because the development or the evolution of theories about local development focus on the importance of local capital. And craft is a combination of social, cultural, and if you want also potential economic capital. So it is a potential, an enormous potential in an area which with the right policies could be, let me use exploited, but I don't like the exploited there, in order to make also the sector boost. More, property right. There's a huge debate about the role of property right to protect craft. Shall we use patent, trademark, the sort of denomination of controlled origin? Again, the law on property right is super complicated. It's very difficult to protect it. But you see more and more craft people trying to use these as a way to protect, but especially to make their work acknowledged, appreciated as something special. Crucial element, policies for education and skill. I mentioned before, in some cases you have the master title, the maître in France. In our study, actually, we were very fascinated by this because it seems to allow craftsmen to get a different stance, a different position within society. But there again, for instance, within the European Union, there are debate about the use of master title because it's a way to exclude some people from having specific activities in some countries. So you see, it's never very easy. It's never white or black. Again, distribution. I find distribution a very interesting aspect. We are doing, as I mentioned, a research on ceramic in the Netherlands. And what is interesting is to see where do craftsmen try to make their beautiful object seen. Are there fairs? Are they using just galleries? I was talking with a quite important ceramic maker in my region, and he was very happy because he's going to sell this object in the sort of Italian Bijenkorf. But we were thinking with another colleague, is this what you really want? Do you want to, as a craftsman, do you want your object to be at the Bijenkorf in the houseware section, or would you like to have a separate spot like Louis Vuitton, almost like as an artist? Where? How? I mean, but the distribution is fundamental. If I don't see the beautiful object that X or Y do, I won't get them. I don't know how to get them. And lastly, but not less importantly, capacitation. We do believe that the capacitation of craftsmen is fundamental, which means managerial skills in order to be able to make themselves more visible. And sometimes about these, I have some doubts. If you are a craftsman, it's like an artist. You want to do that. It's this sort of self-pleasure that you have by doing what you like. So probably policy would be good if you are capable of finding ways to match somebody who's very good with marketing, with management, with somebody who's very good with craft. Or, for instance, the provision of working spaces. We talk a lot about Fab Lab, co-working space. Again, in Italy, this is like the dream for all the craftsmen I know because it's not in place. But for instance, in Holland, there are more possibilities. At least municipalities sometimes provide spaces which are like quite cheap. And this is already a huge kind of support for craft people. Or the provision of distribution spaces, which goes very much with what I was saying before. But then I think that we also to ask a basic question. Sorry, I'm a bit of an economist there. Is there a need for these products? Is there a demand? Because if we make beautiful objects but nobody asks for them, we have a problem. We miss the other side of this dialogue. Let me talk of a dialogue and not of a market. Maybe what is missing is the need. How can we create this need? How can we make people aware that craft objects are things that they really want? And here I go to the idea of the circular economy, of doing less but quality instead of quantity, having objects which are not mass-produced, so environmental, more sustainable. It is something which I think is very interesting from the policy point of view. And I believe, here probably I'm a bit more optimistic than Wendy, I think that this is an interesting time for craft. The idea of the experience economy, which is like new way of interpreting the economy, I think provides an interesting flow for craft, because what is important is not the good anymore. The good is a basis for an experience. And I think, personally, I like craft a lot. I think that every single craft object embody an experience, transmit a null set of values that represent an experience for the person appreciating, buying, using a piece of craft. And I must say that a second element, which was also referred to before, which is important at the moment, is the idea of sustainability. I think our attention to sustainability, environmental sustainability, is something that allows us to focus back on craft and on the potential that craft has from the point of view of reducing material waste. What you were saying before, quality versus quantity. That is something that I think provides really another big opportunity for craft. So I believe that there is space for this, but we need really to have what we like to call a craft culture, which is something that brings together all the actors involved. So it means the policymaker, it means craftsmen, it means research, it means initiative like the craft festival, Ambacht in Beeld, my Dutch is terrible, but also any kind of research, our cooperation with the Craft Council, the research with the Craft Council. What was interesting before is this idea of bringing craftsmen to the fore. They are the one that should explain us as researcher what is the best way of proceeding. Because I put this a summary of all the policies that I introduced, but there's not a unique recipe. There are as many recipes as countries. There are as many recipes as artisans, I would say. So what is important is really to bring these groups together in order to find the right way to proceed. And for this, I believe it is important to have a good definition of craft, because that's really confusing. I can tell you in Italy, there are 3 organizations putting different items on the list. So that's crazy. If I want to know what is craft in Italy, it depends which organization I like better. So that doesn't make any sense. We need to develop place-specific policies, but also we need to consider the cultural and social values that are embedded in craft in order to really realize this craft culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, and I'm very pleased to let you know that a lot of the topics that you touched upon in your talk are going to be addressed, if not in the Q&A, then certainly by the next 4 speakers who will talk a lot about their experience in practice, so from the theory to the practice. And I'm talking a bit quickly because I know that the first speaker needs to catch a train at 9 o'clock and we're running a little bit late. So let me introduce to you Maaike Roozenburg, who trained at one of the leading art academies in the Netherlands, the Gerrit Rietveld Academy. She founded Studio Maikel Roozenburg, where she and her team develop products and projects combining design, art history, and heritage. Maaike is also a visiting tutor at the TU, the Technical University in Delft, and head of the Master Industrial Design at the KABK, the Royal Academy of the Art in The Hague. She's here to share her vision with you, and also the vision of the Master of Industrial Design. And this vision is by questioning and redesigning the conventions in the industrial system, something Anna briefly touched upon, I think. Industrial designers can contribute to a more sustainable, meaningful, and culturally, my God, all these long words, culturally diverse world. The stage is yours, Maaike.
First of all, it's really nice to be here in this whole setting on this theme, because I think it's amazingly urgent to talk about crafts and the role it can play, but also to talk about the whole system of production. I'm here a bit, I'm going to briefly tell you about 2 roles I have, because I'm a designer on the one hand and educated as a ceramicist, and on the other hand I'm head of the Master Industrial Design. So I will try to be brief and show you 2 projects. The first one, as part of my studio, is a sort of ongoing research called True Replicas, and it's based on my long love for historical crafted objects. And I studied art history before, and then I thought, it's such a pity to only put it in words. I want to make stuff, so that's why I shifted to the Rietveld Academy and studied ceramics. And what I do now is still not so much making new objects, but to use old objects to revive, to remake them and redo it. And in this pairing material and immaterial heritage. And to do this, I use a combination of digital technologies and crafts. So I'm looking for the way to innovate both, which gives a lot of failure and a lot of interesting outcomes most of the time. But it's really stressing how can you use digital technologies as a new tool for crafts, and how can you meet. And I want to show you one project as an example. These are the gardens of Het Loo Palace, close to Apeldoorn, more to the east of the country. And in these gardens were once vases, Delftware vases. And they are not longer there. There are only these shreds that the archaeologist found. And there was a long longing to put the vases back in the garden. And then they found this one at a collector, so they had one. And they did find 2 other ones, one in the basement of a castle in Britain and one in Germany in a castle. And what was the question was like, can we use digital technologies together with the craftsmanship of the Royal Tichelaar factory to reconstruct these vases and put them back in the garden? And it was an interesting experiment to see if you could collaborate like that and how that could work out. So it was sort of a pilot to see how that could work. And what we did is we tried all kind of ways to digitalize these things, because it's quite amazing that all these recently developed technologies that render physical objects into digital data and vice versa, and there's so much happening in there. And it's like the tools you saw in the slides before, but then we are not so much used to it. They are not yet have the tradition, and they're not used as crafted tools, but they will. So we use all kind of ways to render the physical vases into digital data. This is in the basement of the castle in Britain. And here you see also the collaboration, because that's me with the scanner. Bertus is a engineer from the Technical University, and Jan without the hat is the technical expert from Royal Tichelaar, who knows everything about glazes in the 17th and 18th century. So we worked together. He was making the drawings, we were scanning the whole thing, and in the end, you get a model. And what's interesting in this process, because you could say, why the hell would you do it digitally? We can remake these vases. But what's interesting about using really the original one and scanning it is that you get all the traces. You're like an archaeologist in this one object, so you see the traces of the making process of the original one. So you're really close to the skin of the original object when you're remaking it in this way. And on the other hand, you combine the technologies. So we sort of undressed the vase, took off all the object or all the decorations to remake it. So here you see at the workshop in of Tichelaar, there's a 3D milled model, and there are 3D prints of all the decorations that were on the vase. And then in the end, you use a really traditional way of mold making to reconstruct it. And in the end, there were again 42 vases in the garden of the palace. So they are now inside because it's winter, but in May they will get outside again. And what's interesting of the process is that it's using digital technology and craft to explore new ways of production. And now briefly on what we do at the Masters. We are really aiming for redesigning the industry. And in that sense, it's related to the formal speakers, so I'm quite happy. Because this field of industrial production we designed, and it's just one way to do it, but we all focused on it. So this whole system of assembly lines, of packaging, of design, of business models, of advertising, creating demand, this whole system, we made it. And you could say by now, I think a lot of people feel that it's more creating problems instead of solving them, and that it's not really contributing to the well-being of us humans or the planet as a whole. So we need to reconsider this whole system. And I think what's a really good thing is that a lot of people are feeling that urge. You're not a nerd or an activist anymore. It's like a broader spread idea. And we believe that by questioning the system, there are a lot of opportunities to change it. And there are all kind of models possible. Also, with this whole field of new technologies and new production, things can be local again. Digital and handmade can be combined. Other business models can be designed. But that's not a technical question. It's a question of, it's a human question. So that's why we really focus on material culture, like really as objects, the way they are produced, the way they are used, and the way they are valued. So how do we value the things we have? And how do we keep that value? Because we still have a system that's still based on the whole idea of making faster, producing faster, sell more, sell faster. Which is, if you think of it, it's bizarre that we have it. But to change it, it's not easy. And that's not a technical and not a purely economical thing, but it's a question like, how do we relate to the things we have? And how can they grow with us? How do they wear off? How do we repair them? Do we have the knowledge to repair them? No, we don't. But if you, their craft could really play a role, because there's still so many ways to produce stuff locally and make things that can be repaired and can be valuable. But they are now not really a big part of our economic system. And I think when we value things differently, they can. Because if things are produced somewhere on the other side of the world to get them here, it's polluting. It's really, really bad. But we don't calculate it in the price of objects. So if we really really reconsider what we value and calculate all these things in an economic system, I think then the scales Anna showed will be completely different, but we don't do it. But I think it will be, we will have to, and it will be really good and nice to do it. I'm almost running out of time, am I? I want to show you briefly one project of a graduate, Bas Vroon, who made... Sorry?
It's your train.
It's my train, which means I'm running out of time. I will show it briefly, and you can look it up at his website if you're interested. It's by Bas Vroon. He made a machine that's heating up biocomposites and making it stiff and stern at certain points and fluffy and soft on other points. And it means that you can make things in another way, but he works together with tailors to make objects that are on the one hand really locally and digitally produced, and on the other side are virgin materials, so you can use them again and again. You can separate them really easily. So it's really a meeting of craft and digital production. And with it, he made now a fashion collection where he works with tailors and digital fabrication to see how you can make things on a local scale, on demand, so to change a whole way of production. Thank you.
Godelieve Bun, director of the Leidsche Instrumentmaker school. I briefly asked her before if there is an English term for this school. There isn't, so we'll just call it LIS. She herself studied industrial design and mechanical engineering in Delft, worked as innovation and research manager for several companies in the food industry, was a college teacher and developed the educational program for sustainable innovation at the Hogeschool Utrecht. And now the LIS, Leiden Instrumentmakerschool. It was founded a long, long time ago, in the 19th century, by Kamerling Onnes, who I only know because his name is sometimes on a street, exactly. He was an esteemed scientist, and he needed craftsmen to build his research setups. So he founded this school. And to this day, the LIS still trains precision technology professionals. They develop research equipment for scientific institutes, universities, hospitals, and for companies with their own research departments. All of these organizations work on groundbreaking research. It's very important, and it requires specialist and accurate tools. So LISers, LIS graduates, are also involved in research into sustainable solutions and alternative energy sources. Please welcome Godelieve Bun.
Thank you very much. So I think half of my speech is it's already done now. But okay, well, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Do you hear me? Is okay? Okay. Well, craftsmanship. We're talking about today, this evening, very often about fancy, exciting, and things which have a very positive image. People long for artisan breads, beer, cheese, handmade clothing or furniture. Well, this is something I'm not going to talk about. Well, I'm really going to talk about different fields, and you will already introduce that. Well, skilled craftsmen are really crucial for innovation and the development of science and technology. You might not have never have thought about it, but craftsmanship and innovation and development of technology and science goes hand in hand. There would be no breakthroughs nor innovations without craftsmanship. I will show you some instruments which were made by former students of our school, the Instrumentmaker school in Leiden, which I'm honored to be the principal. This is in CERN. You might recognize it from some pictures. Well, where they have really looked for the smallest particles in the world. This is space. On the right-hand side, you see the Moonwalker. It's an instrument where we can really measure very accurate things in the space. So you can imagine that are really single instruments, and well, you don't produce that in mass, you really produce it as single instruments. Here you see instruments which are needed for medical systems, for interventions, for examinations. And also these things are very often made just as a single product, especially if the the researcher or the medicine, he really needs something special for his actions. And now I will show you two things which are really important for the, let's see, well, I'll just go back here. Well, which is really important for the renewable energy. This is a hydrogen cell. This is also developed by our students, and this next second, oh, sorry, yeah, it goes, yeah. This is a project, actually we have two students are here available, so Tony and Koen. They worked on this project. And this is a system which is developed in the Delft University, where they transform water and CO2 into methanol, and the methanol can again will be used as a fuel. So even in the development of sustainability, it's very important to have this kind of equipment and also the craftsmen. Well, innovation means walking on the edge of the unknown. Scientists and inventors find their challenge in exploring the boundaries when entering the unknown. The whole process of study and creativity before really is necessary to get ideas. But a new and creative idea And thought is not really necessary, not really the key for innovation. You need more for that. Well, during my study in Delft, it was common expression to have actually, to develop something, you have 3 different phases. You develop something 3 times. The first time is in the mind of a person. People has an idea, an invention. Then you put it on paper, you draw it. So that's the second time. And the third time is really when you make the product. So, as soon as a scientist has a designer or an engineer has an idea, it should be transformed, and when it is transformed in something really tangible, our instrument maker enters the stage. The researcher and the instrument maker become a team and develop an instrument or a performing setup, test setup. Yeah, we see some examples of our instrument makers making some small instruments. Well, we already told, the Leidsche Instrumentmaker School is actually one of the oldest vocational educations in the Netherlands. The school was founded in 1901 by Kamelin Onnes. He was a professor in physics and a Nobel Prize winner. Well, more than just a name on the street. Well, in that world, in the physical world, he's very famous. He's coming from Leiden. We are very proud of that. And well, he needed these professionals to make his instruments. So he had a school, and boys and girls, at that moment only boys from the surrounding of Leiden, they came to the school, and they really 5 days a week they were working in a workshop, and on Friday evening and on Saturdays went to school to get the knowledge and the theoretical things. But the whole day and the whole week they were practicing their knowledge. Still, we are a vocational school. We are independent. Till the 70s, we were part of the Leiden University. You know, this professor was part of the university, so we were always part of the university. But, well, once the government decided that we could not be part of the university anymore, so since the 70s, we are an independent school. And actually, we survived the trend of the educational realm, leading into the establishment of this large multidisciplinary regional training centers like the ROCs. And we are really happy and really eager to stay independent, because independent also means that we can do our craftsmanship like we think it is important and like our alumni think it is important. So, we still teach boys and girls how to design and build test equipment and how to make measuring instruments that can be used to perform research with a very high accuracy. These days, research is about finding the smallest particles at CERN, building the parts for the space travel, and making all kinds of tooling for medical science, and developing solutions for the energy transitions and for circular economy. Well, this is something different than my previous speaker was talking about. It's really about innovation, bringing the science further. Our students are very well trained. They're still 5 days a week. They are in-house from 8 o'clock till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The half of the time they have really practical work, and the other time, other part of the week they are doing theoretical work, which is really important. So, but when they do the training, they still do machining on metal, glass, plastic, and wood. They do the turning, the milling, and the glass blowing. We have also a glass blowing department, which is important for the scientific world in the chemistry. You still have all the glass work in a laboratory, so that sometimes is still handmade. But nowadays we also work on computer-controlled machines and also the automation of equipment, because also the small machines, well, they are automated sometimes, but it's not mass production. No, but be aware, our instrument maker is not a tinkerer. A good instrument maker understands the material. She knows about the theory of the machine techniques. She can also design, Koen. He can also design the device, which is important because designing is about translating the idea of the scientist or the medicine person, the idea to translate it into a real instrument. So they should be able to understand what's happening there. So they can make calculations as well. And they communicate. They should be able to communicate with the scientists. So in this world, they really should speak their languages very good because, well, scientific world is over the boundaries of the Netherlands. And they also should understand the language of the scientists. So it's not just English, but they also have to understand. Actually, if a physician really has a certain question, they should really understand what this physician means, which is sometimes difficult, but they can manage that. Okay. So, craftsmanship for innovation, we do it in Leiden.
Thank you very much, Godelieve. They also do that in Enschede, further east in the country. And our next speaker, Annemieke Koster, is from there to tell you all about it. She studied communication science at Twente University. No crafts, no arts, no science. Well, communication. And she worked in the advertising business for a while before she quit her job to start a sustainable weaving mill. The mill, which she started in 2013, is called Enschede Textielstad and is based, as you may have guessed, on former textile city Enschede. It is the first weaving mill in Europe to solely produce sustainable cloth. And it's suitable, this cloth, for both fashion and upholstery, and is woven on demand for fashion designers, interior brands, and architects. Annemieke is here to tell us all about it. Please welcome her to the stage.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction and for you all to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion because I already heard that craftsmanship has several different definitions. Mine is on a quite large industrial scale, so no arts and crafts in my basement, but really in a factory. But I will tell you all about how I started and what craftsmanship entails to me. Well, as you might know or might not know, because you don't know where Enschede is, it's almost Germany, so I don't blame you. But until the 1960s, Enschede was one of the biggest textile producing cities in Europe. Actually, the biggest one next to Manchester. At one point in time, I believe, I don't have the number correct, but almost 50% of our brutto national income was made in Enschede from the weavers. So we're a poor city right now, but at one point in time, we contributed a lot to knowledge and skills in Europe. This is Enschede at the moment, or actually a couple of years ago, at the opening of the new Primark store. Waste collector Twente Milieu actually had to put garbage bins on the square in front of the store because people just didn't bother trying things on. They just bought them in the streets in daylight. They thought, well, I don't like the color, just get rid of it. It was only a couple of euros. Or even they got rid of their clothes they were wearing, tried on the new skirt, liked it, and then just discarded of their old trousers. And to me, seeing that happen was really, well, envisioning how much of a disposable product fashion has become. Because, well, something goes wrong with my presentation, but I will talk you through it anyways. If you look at the numbers back in the days, so early 1900s, people bought clothes and a coat, for instance, for, well, it could cost their monthly income. They just went to a tailor or a relative. They discussed their needs and demands in terms of functional requirements, but also aesthetics. And the coat was made by a craftsman or a craftswoman, and it was something that you cherished for years. Even passed it on to a different generation, and whenever your coat was broken down, you went to repair it. At the moment, on this day in time, it's cheaper to buy a new coat than to go to a tailor to repair your lining. So that's strange to me, and it has a lot of consequences. One being the fact that, well, this image is actually where, well, my idea for starting my company actually emerged. This was the collapse of the Rana Plaza factory in Bangladesh in 2013. And almost 1,100 garment workers died in that tragic incident. They were working in a really, the building had tears in the walls. People were complaining about the conditions of the building and also of how close they were together behind the sewing machines. Nobody did anything, but the whole world was shook when this happened. It triggered a big discussion online and on TV. A lot of experts were saying, well, you should buy a Chanel bag because it's expensive and it's made by craftsmen and from very good materials, because such an expensive brand must be good in all senses. Well, I was doubting that because I thought, well, I made a lot of shirts and other garments for myself at the time, and I noticed that the price of a garment is not always necessarily correlated to the quality of it, let alone of the working conditions under which it's made. So I decided to do some research. I worked at an online agency at the time, so I thought, well, if I dig deeply enough, I can convince some co-workers to make a documentary or do something to raise awareness about the fashion industry. That got a little bit out of hand, because at one point in time, it's funny because there's some members of the business club that I joined are here, but I went with them to Berlin. And on the way back, I was talking about how I wanted to give a presentation about the working conditions in the fashion industry and convince people that things needed to change. I turned into one of those annoying people at birthdays saying, well, the system is broken down, we should do something. And one of the guys said, well, why don't you actually do something? And that triggered me because I thought, my whole life I've been raised to put my words into action, and why am I not doing that in this case? So I decided, actually we drove back on the Saturday, and on Monday I quit my job. My mom raised me to put actions to my words, but she didn't like this particular decision. But I really felt the urgency to do something and to at least try to build a system to my own standards and beliefs, and not accept the fact that the industry is as it is. So without any knowledge, without ever having been in a factory, I decided to start one. I'm still thankful for that blissful ignorance, because with a lot of technical knowledge, I wouldn't have started this whole project. So here's a short video about, this is 5 years forward, how the factory is at the moment.
Enschede used to be the beating heart of the European textile industry. We built upon this legacy by starting our truly sustainable weaving mill. We produce in a conscientious way that doesn't harm people and the planet. Our mission is to keep improving the textile industry. With us?
So I'm running a little bit out of time, so I will run through the next slides briefly, but you've seen the factory in this video, and actually that's one thing I want to pinpoint, because I was fortunate enough to meet a factory owner of the last remaining weaving mill in Enschede. He offered me to weave some samples on his looms. And by the time I purchased my own looms, he said, well, why not put them in the factory hall and just produce here? And from one thing came the other. At the moment, I'm doing all my production over there, because when my company grew, it didn't make sense to me to just go to a different hall on a different part of the town and start a competing factory. Why not collaborate? And to me, that's really the essence of what I do, and the essence of craftsmanship to me is also sharing knowledge and sharing skills, and also not being afraid of opening doors to potential competitors, because, well, you can see them as competitor or also as an opportunity to look at your own business in a different way and, collaborate to make it better. We produce in a sustainable way, so that means a lot of recycled yarns, and at the moment we can weave up to 78% of recycled contents in the garment. My shirt, for instance, is an example of it. It's recycled PET bottles and recycled cotton. It's an old shirt because at the moment, with the whole debate about microplastics, I wouldn't weave it again, but it's a possibility. And I made the decision to supply both the fashion and the interior markets with my fabrics. Because, well, when I was able to weave a very thin cloth suitable for shirts, it wasn't really difficult to make it thicker and make it an upholstery fabric. So where most weaving mills choose to make bedding or shirt fabrics or one specific type of fabric, we do everything and do that on demand, so we hardly ever make the same fabric twice. We always make tiny adjustments to make the fabric meet the requirements of the customer even more. Collaboration is essential, as I mentioned. I have a textile network with almost 200 entrepreneurs that are somehow active in the textile industry, whether it's a student with a side business or a consultant or really a production company. Because when I started this company, I noticed that a lot of the factory owners, they had staff aging from 50 to 65. And they said, well, in about 10 years' time, we will have a problem because then all the skilled weavers are gone. And I said, well, I think you have a problem right now, because if you replace those weavers in 10 years' time with someone that just drops out of school, there's a knowledge gap in your company. So why not educate weavers and machine operators right now instead of when it's too late? So we're running a master apprentice program together with a local ROC department. They have a lot of old books lying around of the old textile schools when they were quite big. So that's something that we do in order to keep the knowledge alive. Last image to conclude, because this is what makes my job so awesome, because my co-workers all of a sudden are not the white people from 20 to 35 at the marketing agency, but weavers in all ages. Tomorrow, actually, a weaver that is almost 70 years old comes to the factory to help me repair a machine, because I don't know all the details about that machine, and I really value those days with a weaver. He's called Dick, and he's so passionate, and next to learning a lot of the crafts, I also learn a lot about his lifestyle, his background in the textile factories, and also how I don't want to be like all the bosses he worked for. So it's really interesting to share stories, share time and knowledge. So that's something that I want to conclude with. So, thank you.
Thank you, Annemieke, for sharing your very inspiring story. And I've noticed other people, but myself as well, watching the time. We are running a little bit late, and I very much appreciate your patience because we have one more speaker. The discussion will be a bit shorter than was planned because we decided to let everyone share their stories first, and hope you appreciate that as well. The last speaker is Frank Hemeltjen. He is an advisor for the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage, Kenniscentrum, Immaterieel, Erfgoed, Nederland, and also in charge of the Crafts Lab, at Ambacht Lab, which was launched in 2018. The Crafts Lab is a partnership between craftspeople and various training institutes, artists and designers, encouraging these parties to collaborate for a period of 8 to 12 weeks. And the aim is for them to come up with innovations that will give crafts a sustainable future. Frank, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Like I was introduced, the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage is basically implementing a UNESCO Convention of 2003, and that's on intangible cultural heritage. We do that by trying to help the different communities who still carry on with the heritage to support them. One way of supporting is the idea of Crafts Lab is by putting back together the chain of production again, or repairing it. And it means that designers, artists, craftspeople, but also students cooperate in one system, in a workshop in this case. They put together, the door is closed, and they have to think about the possibilities of a craft, the possibilities of the materials, the nowadays production system, and how you want to work within that system. We heard by several people tonight. The questions, the problems, and the pathways are quite visible already, but they're not suspended, they're not connected at the moment. The Crafts Lab is one way of trying to find a pathway, a route map to a future, to a sustainable future, wherein making, designing, inventing is put back together again. I'll show you a small piece of film that makes it more clear. Welkom bij het Ambachtenlab. Het Ambachtenlab is eigenlijk bedoeld als een workshop waarbij ambachtsmensen, kunstenaars, vormgevers en studenten samenwerken aan innovatie.
Ik ben Rien Staarts, ik ben een stoelenmatter uit Zundert.
Ik ben Margje van der Dracht en ik werk in de zorg, daar verdien ik mijn geld. Maar daarnaast ben ik ook leerling stoelenmatter.
Ik ben Maarten Strang, ik ben productontwerper.
Ik ben Kees Hurkes, ik ben ontwerper in Eindhoven.
Het ambacht wat nu centraal staat in het Ambachtenlab is stoelenmatten.
We zijn vandaag in Zundert. We werken nu vandaag in mijn werkplaats samen met Kees, Maarten en Margje.
Maarten, gaan we doen? Spelen? Maarten is al aan het spelen, hè?
En zou je zelf ook eens niet iets gaan doen?
Ja, even kijken.
Ja, dat noemen ze inspiratie opdoen.
Nee,
oh. Ja, maar voor snelheid moet je hier niet zijn.
Zeker essentieel om het in het echt even te zien, want het biedt gewoon veel meer perspectief in het materiaal zelf en de beperkingen waarmee je werkt.
Je zou hier je basis kunnen maken. Alleen zit je dan met een lelijke kant en een mooie kant.
Ja, dat vind ik op zich niet eens zo heel erg.
Dat is mijn zwakte.
Ja, het verschil tussen Maarten en Kees is dat zij echt vanuit een idee werken. En dat stoelenmatten zelf gewoon echt geneigd zijn om te herstellen wat er al is.
Ik heb Margje gevraagd of ze voor mij een bolletje wil maken, of
ja?
een bal. Kun jij een vierkantje maken?
Dan zit ik toch weer in de stoel.
Ja. Je wil een kubusje maken van 42, dat ik eens
Nee.
Dat gaan we niet doen. Rien denkt vanuit het meubel, vind ik prima, vanuit zijn vakmanschap, vind ik ook prima. Maar heel erg vast daarin. En ik denk als ontwerper, dan zou je verwachten dat ik ook een product ga maken, dus dat ik ook met een stoel kom of iets. Maar daar zit nu een stapje voor. Als ontwerper ben je eigenlijk in de eerste fase vrij.
Ja, ik denk nog steeds in de vorm van stoelen. Terwijl Kees en Maarten die denken heel anders. Maar ja, hij zegt dat timmeren we er wel uit. En ja, ik blijf volhouden. Het moet toch iets van een stoel gaan worden. Snap je waar ik naartoe wil of niet? En dan wordt dit de rugleuning.
Ik zie dat Kees Rien heel erg uitdaagt om uit zijn comfortzone te komen. En dat Rien heel graag in die comfortzone blijft zitten. Dus het is wel een mooie rivaliteit ontstaat daar. En ja, ik denk dat er een heel verrassend project uit gaat komen hier.
Elastiek niet, denk ik.
Deze mensen kregen dus 8 weken de tijd om samen te werken. Opnieuw naar hun ambacht of naar het ambacht stoelenmatten te kijken. En we hopen dus dat dat ook resulteert in een nieuwe visie, nieuwe mogelijkheden voor de stoelenmatten.
Vandaag zijn we voor de 3e bijeenkomst in het Openluchtmuseum.
Ik ben het vreubelen. We zijn eindelijk aan de slag met materiaal.
Afgelopen week heb ik de tijd genomen om na te denken waar we met het project naartoe kunnen gaan. En ik heb daarin iedereen de opdracht gegeven om 2 dingen mee te nemen.
Ja, het is allebei niet geschikt om op te zitten en zelfs niet, heeft niks met een stoel te maken. Nou, Maarten stuurde dus een mailtje van of wij allemaal 2 objecten mee wilden nemen. Nou ja, ik had het er net met Rien over, maar we hadden allebei zoiets van ja, en nu? Dus ik heb op de kar gekeken waar de spullen lagen voor de stort. En heb ik een oude gieten meegenomen en een vies steltje. En daar ben ik nu mee aan het werk. Waar ik het mee repareer is sterker dan het materiaal zelf. Dat vind ik ook wel weer grappig.
Vorige week was ik aan het sturen om de vakmensen los te krijgen en mezelf ook los te houden. Dat is in de loop van de week veranderd dat ik de vakmensen los heb gemaakt en mezelf een restrictie opgelegd heb die helemaal niet leuk is, maar die wel heel erg goed is. Kwijt. Hier kan het vast niet dat ik wil.
Nee, dat wordt niet in. Nee.
Dus ik ben dingen aan het omwisselen, aan het kijken van wat mij dat brengt.
Kees verraste me vooral, omdat hij dus 2 weken heeft gezegd geen stoel, geen stoel. En nu komt hij zelf aan met een stoel. Nou, ik viel zowat van mijn stoel. Ja. Dus, maar van Rien had ik het wel een beetje verwacht, dat hij 2 stoelonderdelen had meegenomen.
Vrij expressie.
Rien is niet zo gelukkig. Hij maakt wel een stoel, maar hij vindt het niks.
Je mag je niet voor gestudeerd hebben, Kees.
Nou, daar kun je wel voor studeren.
Rien is op een hele vrije manier bezig eigenlijk. En ja, daarin worden weer nieuwe dingen ontdekt. Dus ik denk dat dat heel goed is.
Wie wil hem testen straks?
Ja, Rien is heel gemeen. Die zit nou het leukste te doen van iedereen. Die zit te doen wat ik wil doen.
Krak!
Yes. Voetje van de vloer. Ja. Ik ben er niet klaar, hè? Nee, ik ben nog lang niet klaar.
Ja, het is goed om te zien wanneer mensen uit een comfortzone treden. Dat is het moment dat ze gaan leren. Dan ga je nieuwe ervaringen opdoen.
Hij neemt helemaal een vorm aan.
Ja, nu is het materiaal ook nog eens nat natuurlijk. Ja, elke keer als je gaat zitten moet je er met de gieter over.
In fact, this is it's a method. It's looking for a method. How can you get people together, find a co-creation, co-production. We heard about who owns the idea, who owns the material. In this cooperation, it's all together. So the designer, the craftspeople are bound by a contract in which explains that the idea and the design that's going to come out of the workshop, that they have the ownership, a part of the idea. So that's very important. They are really working together. There's no difference in a knowledge field. The student who's cooperating as well has also a part of the idea. He's working together, so he's also owner of the idea and the product. Another very important thing about the crafts is the economical base, the demands for the product or the design. I'm working on the second part of this method now, as we're talking here. But this is starting, bringing back the production chain and producing new ideas in a traditional craft. In the second part, I want to focus back again on the product and the market and which place does the traditional crafted product get in a shop, or do bring it to a fair. I think handcrafted material or objects should be in a luxurious shop on a good stage, get a good quality of attention. So a fair is not one of the best places to show your trade as a craftsman. I'd rather bring it to the museum. I'm working in the Dutch Open Air Museum, so I'd rather bring it to the museum. That's why I want to cooperate with museums as well, to organize a craft lab, because that's a better stage for craft than a fair. On second hand, it's also important to start a conversation with the craft people, also with artists and designers, to look upon the craft and deal with the problems, deal together with the problems. It's not only a problem of the craft people, it's also a problem for the designers of the future, I think. We have to cooperate to deal, to find solutions for a sustainable future, and you have to do that together. So I would like to end my story of my plea with that.
How many present here are themselves craftsmen or identify as craftsmen? Okay, thank you. And how many people of you here, and those might be some of the same people, engage with sustainability, find that important in their work, in their lives? Okay. And are there any policymakers here? Maikel, first I'd like to go to you, because we started this evening introducing the motto, the future is handmade, and the theme of this symposium, craftsmanship, innovation and sustainability. Very briefly, what struck you this evening?
What struck me most was the presentation by Annemieke as an excellent example of what I was trying to explain in my presentation and what we're trying to explore. We see what potentially could happen, because it also combines very well the presentations that we heard. So, for instance, Anna was telling about the economy changing, becoming more of an experience economy. So consumers want different kinds of objects. They are actually intrigued by or want locally produced, sustainable objects. And if you look at, for instance, the film that Annemieke showed, it instantly did what I was referring to. It starts with the heritage. It starts with saying, look, Enschede is a city that's actually founded on textiles. So it instantly draws you in that way, because the past, in a way, it also, it sells also.
We
and
can
that's
tell
important, of course.
powerful stories
it
looking at
redefines
the past,
this traditional craft in a very sustainable way. And I think that's actually where we need to look. So not so much thinking about, okay, what was craft, or was it what is craft, but what can craftsmanship be? That's, I
and
think,
what can
the
it
interesting
mean?
question.
Yeah, thank you. Over to you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to contribute something? I see a few hands. I'll ask my colleagues here to hand you the microphone.
My name is Rutger Graas. I'm a furniture maker, and I'm interested in innovation. You've all touched the subject, but I want to know more about the dynamics you think are necessary to have a healthy environment for innovation in the craft field. I think serendipity is a word which really is important to mention to help with innovation, instead of just giving a bag of money. To create dynamics and helping people to find each other to create serendipity. Would you agree? And then it's mostly for all of you.
Well, I think Annemieke has the most experience with serendipity and leading to innovation. But have you got any advice to a colleague?
Well, I think it's not about necessarily about serendipity, but more about a pure passion and drive to want to make a sustainable adjustment to your process. Because as I've noticed, I supply a lot of furniture makers with my cloth, and they tend to just glue it on. Because they learned it, or they use a stapling gun or anything just to make sure that it's nice and sturdy and never goes off. But if it never goes off the chair, it can also not be recycled. So if you want to be truly sustainable, you have to think outside of the box and outside of how you think things should be done, and alternate your process accordingly. So it's more your intrinsic motivation that is key in this than serendipity or something like that, in my opinion. But
Thank you very much. I hope this is helpful. Next question.
My name is Abraham. One of the challenges I have been discovering through the years was that it's not enough to be passionate about trying to innovate our technology into a more sustainable technology, but key for finding real sustainable solutions is understanding what led our ancestors into being pushed into industry, because the problems that we are dealing with today are based on this monster that's called industry. So what happened then, why they have been forced into that position, and what can we do today better in order not to fall again in the same trap?
Thank you. Is there any of you who'd like to respond to this?
I would say that's actually really rather recent that happened. And it's also, I don't think you can actually seek out someone in the past and say like, okay, we're going to blame this person or we're going to blame these politics that did it. Because even if you would, for instance, think about Henry Ford, he developed his factory with all the best intentions for the people involved. Now, the system itself, in the end, created, of course, something that we're now not happy with anymore. And how those developments work, that's also because, in a way, technology starts driving itself, and we partly cannot guide it anymore. But to be honest, I don't think it's very useful to go in the past and sort of seek out the evil ancestor that made this happen.
On to the next question here at the front.
Good evening. My name is it on? Yeah. My name is Sandra Neeson, and I want to thank you all for amazing presentations, very inspiring. This is a continuation from the last question. I noticed that there's a continual talk about the craftsman, and there is some focus here on what is happening in an individual's body or mind while he or she is working. At the same time, there's an emphasis on collaboration, working together. My own work is in Indonesia with textile makers and village traditions, and I've come to the conclusion that what's happening in a global economy, or when the textiles get commodified, is that there's an emphasis on the designer, and that's usually male, and it usually becomes the head of some sort of workshop. And it's the person who gets the glory, the person who stands in the limelight, just the same as we find with designers of clothing. The designer gets the limelight, and all the people who do the craft work get ignored and they're nameless. In my community where I do my work, the weavers, it really makes no sense to talk about individual weavers, although they're amazingly talented and skilled. It's important to talk about the knowledge of weaving as a commons, as a community. And then you're not talking about the craftsman anymore, although nowadays to encourage them, they're highlighting one weaver or another.
Really
to say
sorry
this
to
is
going to
a
have to
weaver.
interrupt you, but
Sorry,
we are running out of time.
Sorry.
So
Okay, thank you. The issue is the individual versus the community, and how do you stand on that? I hear the economist talking about the individual, and I hear that as problematic.
well, maybe Anna would like to explain, because I think she addressed it as a challenge, not so much as a problem, but that's
May
up
I?
to you. Yes?
May I? Yeah. Because I think, and I can also, can you hear me? Yeah. Can also maybe connect the two questions. Actually, I also mentioned the community holder, And what is very interesting, especially if you look at craft as skills, is that this attention not on an individual. I was talking about clusters. So the fact that it's like a shared knowledge, shared skills. So for instance, as a measure, the community holder looking at a community, so all the weavers, not each of them, but them as a group, it's an interesting policy tool in order to emphasize that what matters there is the skill, not on an individual level, but a community level. And I would say, again, this is a way, if you want, I just recall a bit the previous question, to go beyond what happened in the past. And if we look at new sustainable way of creating local development, this could be a way you really develop what is on the area. And I think your example is fantastic from this point of view, because Enschede was a textile, there was this capital there, and with your project and with her project, she was capable of rising it again. So learning from the mistakes of the past, the crisis of the textile, how to make it up again using the capital which is there, which is not of an individual. She was naming a lot of weaver working there. So I agree, it's risky to focus on one, but I think the importance is really this community aspect.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to hand the microphone now to Wendy to finish the evening.
Yeah, we have only 10 minutes because at 10 o'clock we are kicked out of this room. But the good thing is that we can go then downstairs to have a drink, which I'm sure you all will like. I would like to ask Olivier to come forward with the drawing, because I'm very curious what he has taken from all the talks and the brief discussion. And this also gives me time to thank you all the speakers. I want to have a big applause for these wonderful presentations. Thank you very much. And thank you to Joni for moderating this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, look at this. Can you highlight some of the things that you heard and that you drew?
Oh yeah, I started with the kid on his iPad and looking up tools. What was it? What does a hammer look like? Detached from tools and materials, circular economies coming. I thought actually there was going to be more. Wasn't that threatening after all. No. And these are sort of the areas, the different speakers. The joint was good to draw. And the embodied skills went on in this part with the brain is hand, hand is brain. The hand that speaks with the material, that sort of already implies the coordination that is necessary, and the whole body that has to cooperate. And craftsmanship deserves more esteem as an ending there. And Anna here with lots of questions about how to go about definitions of different policies. I sort of made them into a bead ring, and they can there's lots of different measures that can be used. And then we have the more practical examples here. Maikel, was it? Is left. Yeah, with the 3D scan, remaking it, but also it's also coming up reconsidering and re-questioning the system and create new opportunities, which is also sort of I found very strongly in the urgency of the textile and Textielstad. I found actually the most important thing. We need a craft culture, which sort of comes back to everything. Giving it more importance again. And I thought that was a nice one also. What can craftsmanship be? Thinking of possibilities instead of problems. And that's more or less the recap. But yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much. You can come forward and have a look and discuss the questions that you still have informally downstairs at the bar. I want to thank you all very much for being present this evening. Please bring a poster and share the knowledge that you learned this evening, and please come join us at the festival 28-29 September in Amsterdam in the Halle. Thank you very much.